Is it time to invoke the Insurrection Act? Well, I can tell you this much, it is way beyond time that the Trump administration steps in and actually does something when it relates to radical left-wing violence and all of the other insanity that we're seeing plaguing our nation every single day. Just today, we had 2 National Guardsmen shot in the head in broad daylight. This is not a time for memes. This isn't a time for edgy jokes on True Social. This is a time for action. One such potential action would be, yes, the invocation of the Insurrection Act of 1807. Today, we're going to talk about what exactly that is, when it has been used in the past, what it would look like, and why it may be justified to enact right now today. If we get time for it, we'll also be talking about a new YouGov poll. Shows an encouraging statistic. Support for gay marriage has dropped to only 54%, a pretty significant decline over recent years. We also have, kind of on a similar note, men buying babies is somehow back in the national conversation, not something we ever thought that we would be dealing with. Men buying babies, but sure enough, they are. Gay men are purchasing young children. And if we get some time to it, Secretary Duffy says that you need to dress nicer at the airport, and I completely 100% agree with him. Now, before we jump into it, we're going to start off today, by the way, with the conversation surrounding the Insurrection Act. Before we jump into it, as always, I want to say thank you to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, for the tremendous blessings that I enjoy. This episode will be going out just the day before Thanksgiving. So if you're listening after Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving to you and your family and everybody. Enjoy the time that you have with your loved ones. Unfortunately, we know so many people will not have that blessing or that opportunity. Folks are going to be grieving over this holiday for the loss of those 2 guardsmen. So keep them in your prayers, sincerely. Keep your nation in your prayers. Drive safe. This is a crazy time of year. But with that said, let's jump into this conversation about the Insurrection Act. By the end of this conversation, you'll be able to know enough to make up your own mind and answer the question, is it time to invoke the Insurrection Act? So, starting with a bit of a baseline, a foundation here, what even is it? People throw it around. I've seen people talking about it on X, but frankly, as is the case with many political discussions, you have people bouncing around terms, phrases, advocating for the invocation of legislation, and they might have absolutely no idea what it is. They might know it's kind of like a nuclear option, or it's been sort of presented as that. It's really not that nuclear of an option. In fact, we'll get into this a little bit later, but it has been used many, many times throughout our nation's history. It's actually been used about 30 times throughout our nation's history, going way back even to the presidency of George Washington. But what is the Insurrection Act of 1807? Well, it's often called that, but it's not actually just one specific piece of legislation passed in the year 1807. If you want to get really specific about it, and it's worth knowing, all of the details here, it's actually under Title 10. It's sections 251 to 255. That's what's broadly considered to be the Insurrection Act. And a brief summary of it here would be, it allows the president to deploy military forces inside of the United States to suppress rebellion. There could be a domestic violence situation that needs to be put down, or enforce the laws of the United States. Well, that seems like a pretty reasonable thing, and you can already see there's kind of the case being made for why it might be justifiable right now in the United States to call it out. The statute specifically applies Congress's authority. If you're familiar with Article 1, Section 8, Congress is given the power to provide for the calling forth of the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasion. So this is something that has a long historical precedent. This is something that is rooted in Article 1 of the United States Constitution. Congress has provided for the calling forth of the militia. So they have outlined the circumstances. They've outlined this is how you can do it, this is when you can do it, why you can do it, all of that. And they have given this to the President of the United States. Now, some people get this a little bit confused with the Stafford Act. So you might think, throughout history, examples, maybe Katrina. You might think of different times where you've seen the National Guard call out to help with something, whether it's a national disaster or a natural disaster or something like that. That is common. That's typically a deployment under the Stafford Act, which is different because that doesn't have anything to do typically. Now, you might see some bleed over here, but it's not supposed to have anything to do with the execution of the laws. And so let's get a little bit more specific here, and let's dive into what it actually says. So Section 251, when we're looking at the Insurrection Act here, when we're looking at the laws that make it up, Section 251 specifically allows the president to deploy troops if a state's legislature or the governor requests federal aid to suppress an insurrection in that state. This is the oldest part of the law, Section 251, and it is probably the one that has been most often invoked. So whenever they do it, they don't just say the Act of 1807. They typically will pick Section 251, Section 252, Section 253. So Section 251 is specifically if the state legislature or if the legislature is unavailable out of session, the governor can specifically request the President of the United States, we need federal aid to suppress an insurrection in our state. That's one of the circumstances that this can happen. We also have Section 252, which permits deployment in order to enforce the laws of the United States to suppress rebellion against the United States government. So this is not a specific singular state calling to the federal government. This is the federal government saying that we need to deploy the military to enforce the laws of the United States or to suppress a rebellion specifically against the United States government, or whenever, quote, unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellion make it impracticable to enforce federal law in that state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings. So specifically that word there, impracticable. It's not one that we often use in our vernacular and our vocabulary. It means that it can't be done. It's not, if it's impracticable, it's kind of like saying impractical. You can't go under ordinary circumstances. We are not able to enforce the laws of this country. Now, stopping real quick right there. You can probably feel it. The wheels are turning in your brain. You're putting the puzzle pieces together, and maybe the question will eventually turn into not should we invoke the Insurrection Act, but rather why haven't we? Why have we not yet, under the second Trump administration, invoked the Insurrection Act? Because Section 252 seems to be a direct one-to-one application for what we're seeing happen right now. I need not explain any further than the existence of sanctuary states or sanctuary cities that are saying, we are not going to help. We are going to completely ignore. I believe it was in Chicago where you had federal law enforcement calling in and saying, hey, guys, we need help. We're being boxed in right now. We have a serious issue, threat of our lives. And you had the local police say, no, we're not going to help. We're not going to respond. We have federal law enforcement under attack in this country, being boxed in. There was a lady who stepped out with a gun. No, don't worry about it. Let them die. Let federal law enforcement die. Are the laws of the United States being applied in cities like Chicago? Are we seeing what we are supposed to be seeing? Or instead, are we seeing unlawful obstructions? Instead, are we seeing local government making it impracticable for federal law to be applied in that state? Because we are, to answer the question, this isn't like really that much. It's yes. The answer is yes. We are seeing this right now, today, in multiple Democrat cities, in multiple Democrat states. It is not possible for federal law enforcement to execute the law under the ordinary course of judicial proceedings. We have mobs of people like what happened in LA, mobs of people, riots. They were burning cop cars, destroying things. We've seen a long precedent of them taking over. I'm not going to get into all of this just yet, but we've seen it, okay? You understand the case is being made. So that was Section 252, potentially the most applicable. But let's cover Section 253 as well, because it's two parts. The first allows the president to use the military in a state to suppress any insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combinations, so very similar, or conspiracy that, quote, so hinders the execution of the laws that any portion of the state's inhabitants are deprived of a constitutional right and state authorities are either unable or unwilling to protect that right. And so when we see these herds of people who are obstructing the road, when we see these herds of people that are blocking ambulances, when we see these people who are gathering and beating the brakes off of anybody who goes into the street with a Trump flag or a Charlie Kirk t-shirt or a Christian Bible, and they're being attacked, which we have seen time and time and time again, are Americans able to exercise their First Amendment free speech in these blue cities? The answer is obviously no. Americans are not able to freely exercise their rights in these locations because they will be beaten or killed. Beaten or killed. We saw this happen with Charlie Kirk. He was murdered in broad daylight by some Antifa-adjacent lunatic. We don't have hardly any details on that. I think it's high time that we get some actual information regarding what exactly happened to our friend Charlie Kirk. But either way, we have example after example after example of cities being taken over, patriots being beaten in the streets, American flags being burned, police vehicles being burned, violent riots, cities being destroyed, people are losing their lives. All while the government, is just handicapped? Because we have this issue where the local government refuses to do anything. What are we to do? What is the federal government to do? Are we to sit there on our hands? Because right now what's happened is we have the Democrats continually escalating the violence, continually escalating what is, in my opinion, a coup d'etat, an insurrection against this government. Specifically against President Trump, but really it's against, more broadly speaking, the Constitution of the United States. They hate the Second Amendment. They hate the free speech. They hate Christianity. They hate the moral framework that was really essential to the creation, the very fabric of our Constitution. They hate literally all of it, so we're watching in real time a coup. But anyway, so if you look at Section 253, if you look at Section 252, if you look at Section, a little bit less applicable, but if you look at Section 251, there is immediately, just by the black and white letter of the law, a pretty compelling case as to why we might think about it. Why are people even having this conversation, right? Maybe you're somebody on the left and you watch my stuff because, I can present it to you pretty reasonably. If you're somebody on the left and you are looking at the law, you're looking at the Insurrection Act of 1807 and you're actually willing to read the thing, and you're actually willing to understand it. You look at this and you look at the world around us. You look at this and you look at the world around us. You look at this. You look at the black and white, the letter of the law, and you look at the world around us. What's missing? What is insufficient about the black and white letter of the law that would prohibit President Trump from actually doing it? Because listen, again, I'm not one of those people who says we need action for the sake of action. I've spoken about this many, many times here on the show. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I am not a believer in saying, well, something needs to be done, so let's do the first thing that we think of. I'm not one of those people. We have to be able to make a very compelling case for whatever it is that we might should pursue. And if we're going to pursue the Insurrection Act, this is something that will be portrayed in the media as though it's unprecedented. It's really not. We'll get to that here in a second. We need to know how to defend it, what exactly it is, what exactly would be the precedent for it, what exactly does the letter of the law say. And when you present that very clearly, I would challenge any liberal to explain to me what about section, for example, 252 and 253 would not apply to what we've seen happen in this country, would not apply to sanctuary cities, would not apply to the violent riots, the insurrections, Antifa. What about that wouldn't apply? Because I would make the case, based on reading what the law actually is, that President Trump would be well within his rights to do it. Now, that's not to say that I'm openly advocating for him to do it, but I'm looking at it and I'm saying, folks, I don't see a reason he wouldn't. I see maybe political reasons, I see optical reasons, but if you're really interested in the well-being of this country, if you're interested in making the United States of America a place where you can live freely, exercise your First Amendment free speech, not have your stuff burned down by a violent mob, not have federal law enforcement murdered in the street, not have National Guardsmen shot in the freaking head in broad daylight in our nation's capital, yeah, maybe it's time to take some steps. Maybe it's time to do what the Constitution gives you the authority to do. That's my thoughts as I read through this. So let's look at some historical precedent in case there's anybody out there who wants to say, oh, Victor, you can't do this. President Trump can't do that. That would be insane. That's something that's never happened. Surely nobody in the history of our nation, not one executive, has ever decided that things had gotten bad enough to call upon this 1807 Insurrection Act, right? I'm sure that Congress wrote it, passed it, and turned it into law. Yeah, just for the heck of it. It was just one of those things, like you put it in a law and you leave it there and you never dust it and you just assume it's never going to happen. We're all just going to ignore it. They did it just for fun. They had some extra ink laying around. They just decided to heck with it. We might as well. To heck with it. We might as well write it down. Put that in the law. Put it in the federal law. It's okay, guys. Nobody's going to think anything of it. Or perhaps maybe your thought is, well, this is something that's completely unprecedented. It's never been tried before. Maybe it's never been litigated. The court's never had the opportunity. Surely, if he was going to actually try and do this, wouldn't the United States Supreme Court step in and stop him from doing it? Well, let's get into some of the times that it's been used in the past. Because, like I said, the Insurrection Act has been invoked about 30 times. All throughout American history, going all the way back to the first president, George Washington himself. George Washington used it. We've heard famously of rebellions, local rebellions like the Whiskey Rebellion. We've seen it throughout American history. John Adams used it as well. These early rebellions and these bucking against federal authority, because we saw this from different states. We saw this from local, militia groups, you name it. The Insurrection Act has been used nearly 30 times, but it wasn't just for that. This isn't some antiquated thing. This isn't, maybe I can already tell. They're going to go, it hasn't been used since George Washington. Why should we honor it? Why would it even be on the table? This is something that's so antiquated. This is not meant to be used in the modern world. They love to say that about, basically everything that they can. No, not so quick. Most famously, actually, one of the most famous use cases for the Insurrection Act had to do with integration. You look at presidents like Eisenhower, Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson. They used the Insurrection Act during the Civil Rights Movement many times to force integration during the Civil Rights era, to have, like the Little Rock Nine as an example, to have the military, well, I think that was the 101st Airborne, I may be mistaken, to have the military stand outside of a school with bayonets on their rifles. And listen, I'm not even saying, that's a conversation for another day, the use of the Insurrection Act there. And all I'm saying is this isn't some ancient thing. This has been done many, many times all throughout American history. In fact, the last time, most recent, was done in 1992 by Bush Sr., okay? So this is not some crazy thing. I know that if it is ever done, President Trump is going to be painted as some lunatic guy. Oh, I can't believe he would do that because we would never do that. This has been done by both sides of the political aisle going back to freaking George Washington, okay? So why now? We'll make the case for why, and then I'll make the case for why not. That seems fair. So today, I'm recording this a little fired up today because about 3 hours ago, I got the news that we had 2 National Guardsmen shot in broad daylight, murdered, killed in the United States of America, in our nation's capital, by an Afghan national, an illegal alien. So remember, we have cities that are not cooperating with the federal government. They are not allowing the federal government to go in and do their jobs under the ordinary circumstance the way that they're supposed to be able to do it. For illegal aliens, we have an estimated, 20, 30, 40 million illegals in this country right now? We were invaded. We had an actual, we have to repel an invasion. The United States was literally invaded to the tune of millions and millions, 10, 20, 30, 40 million people, completely unvetted, many of them being military-aged young men from radical places like freaking Afghanistan, which, if you haven't heard, the guy who shot and murdered, assassinated these poor guardsmen, he was an Afghan national. His name, I can't even begin to pronounce. He was shouting Allahu Akbar as he ran. And by the way, the guy was naked. What a freaking lunatic. Is that something that you're allowed to do as a Muslim? You're allowed to, that has to be haram or whatever the heck they call it, to get naked in public. But anyways, jihad's completely fine, by the way. Islam is incompatible with the West. Just for the record, we're not going to get into a huge tangent about that right now. Islam is an inherently evil religion. The Prophet Muhammad, their highest prophet, had intercourse with a 9-year-old girl. His favorite wife was named Aisha. He consummated their marriage when she was age 9. There's a whole bunch, look through the hadiths, there's a whole bunch of examples in the Muslim holy books about how you can beat people, how you can kill. If anybody leaves Islam, you are to kill them, to brutally murder them. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. We're not going to get into a full refutation of Islam and all of the problems with it. But we had, this guy, by the way, he was let in. We had tens of millions of these. This specific guy was brought in under a batch called Operation Allies Welcome. He was an Afghan national brought in under the Biden administration in 2021. 2021, by the way, at that time, CNN issued a fact check. And they said, don't worry, the Afghan nationals, they're not unvetted. No, of course not. That would be crazy. Why would we ever think that the Afghan nationals were unvetted during an administration that let virtually everybody in without even so much as beginning to check, to even bother to see who these people actually were? But yeah, that time frame during the Biden administration. Let's look really quickly, by the way, as we speak about this Afghan national that went and murdered these guardsmen. I want to read you a quote from a guy named Ken Dilanian. I don't know. This guy's he's on MSNBC. What do they call it now? MS Now, I think, is where he was on. National Liberal Cable News. I'm going to read a quote from you. His response to the murder of our National Guardsman, because he is blaming President Trump and he's blaming essentially the guardsmen for being there. Yeah, that's a crazy thing. This is a direct quote from him. He says, of course, there's so much controversy happening in the United States right now with ICE, who are also wearing uniforms and masks. So there's, people walking around with uniforms in an American city. There are some Americans who might object to that. And so apparently this shooting has happened. That's a quote from Ken Dilanian. I believe it was on MS Now. A couple of other ones. I don't want to leave you hanging here, make you think that I'm just pulling some isolated instance of the way that the left has been reacting to this. There's another guy, Ryan Sheed. He's over on X. He posted the video of first responders showing up. I believe the bodies were still on the ground in this video. And he put the caption on it. He said, Donald Trump's unlawful and unnecessary deployment of the West Virginia National Guard into Washington, D.C. got 2 guardsmen shot near the White House today. He is specifically, not even being ambiguous about this, he is specifically clearly blaming President Trump. He says his deployment of the National Guard is the reason that these 2 guardsmen got shot. Not the Afghan national. Not the guy who was brought in by the Biden administration unfettered. Not the radical Islamic extremist and the jihadist. No, surely the person to blame here is actually President Trump, because he brought in the National Guard to, make our nation's capital safe? The president's not allowed to use the National Guard to make our nation's capital safe. Yeah, that's about the dumbest, most disgusting, disrespectful thing I could possibly think of. The left always, they hyperventilate whenever it comes to victim blaming. You're blaming the National Guardsmen for having been there, making the case, by the way, that this is somehow an unlawful or unnecessary deployment. Unlawful? Who are you? Who the heck do you think you are, telling everybody that this is some unlawful deployment of the National Guard? He had every right to do that, and it was working, by the way, extraordinarily well until some radical lunatic, and we don't know why the guy did it. We can speculate. He's screaming Allahu Akbar. We don't, but at this exact moment in time, we do not have a memoir. We don't have, a written dissertation from the guy saying this is the reason that I did it. I went and I shot up the National Guardsmen because of X, Y, or Z. But we have to look at the context that everything has been happening in. The radical left has been stoking this. I've been talking about it for weeks now. The radical left has been pushing for this kind of stuff for weeks. You have Don Lemon recently told people to go buy guns to shoot ICE agents, basically. I just did a video earlier, yesterday maybe, on a guy who was saying that, I think he was saying Oregon is an open carry state. They need to go buy guns and prevent ICE from doing this. We've had a lot of very violent, very disgusting rhetoric toward President Trump's use of federal law enforcement and the military. Okay, and they've been calling them Gestapo. They've been calling them Nazis. They've been saying, one person, I think it was on CNN recently, said that they think that a National Guardsman is going to end up shooting somebody. Shooting an American citizen. Do we think that that had nothing to do with this? I don't know. These things don't exist in a vacuum. Is it entirely possible that that had absolutely nothing to do with this particular shooter and his motives? Yeah, it's totally possible. He could have just been a radical jihadist. They don't need any help from the left. Is it equally possible that we're going to find out, or maybe if it's anything like some of the recent investigations, we'll find out absolutely nothing? But is it also somewhat reasonable to assume that perhaps the violent, disgusting, evil rhetoric of the left, which has undoubtedly incited so many other acts of violence, may have played a part in this one as well. It could be the case. I'm not going to speculate too heavily on this, but I mean, the guy was an Islamic extremist from Afghan screaming Allahu Akbar. I think it was probably that he was a jihadist. Who knows, though? Does a jihadist listen to CNN? I'm not quite sure. A jihadist might listen to CNN. But by the way, he's not the only one. So we have two examples now. Let's look at Keith Edwards. Quote from him, reading, this is still up as of at the time of recording. This is still up on his social media. He says, "We still don't know anything about the motive, but let's be clear. If not for Trump's illegal deployment of the National Guard to a non-emergency, they'd be fine." So another guy saying that it's an illegal deployment. What about, where are they getting, did they just make these things up? They just make it up on the fly. I think it's illegal, therefore I'm going to call it illegal. Therefore it what, justifies shooting the National Guardsman? Exactly what is the case that you're making here? Because if this was some illegal deployment of the military and the National Guard is doing Trump's bidding and he's some sort of a totalitarian dictator, the reincarnation of Hitler, if he's turning them into his own personal Gestapo, does that make them agents of the Gestapo? Does that make them like the SS officers that were hanged in the Nuremberg trials? It would seem to me that that would be the case. That's certainly what it seems you're making the argument for, Keith Edwards, whether voluntary or involuntary, whether conscious or you're too stupid to put the pieces together. It would sure seem to me that if all of the rhetoric that you people have said about the National Guard and ICE and federal law enforcement, our military, that if all of that was true, then what? Did they deserve it, Keith Edwards? Is that what you're trying to say? Boy, I sure hope not. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Maybe you're not trying to say that, but boy, you might want to shore up some of your posts. Just a thought. Another example, let's run into Jane Mayer. She says, "It's tragic, it's unnecessary. Those poor guardsmen should have never been deployed. I live in D.C. and watched as they had virtually nothing to do but pick up trash. It was all for a political show, and at what cost?" So this one, Jane Mayer, is blaming President Trump and saying, I guess, it's his fault. It's his fault that they're dead. So instead, we should just turn over their nation's capital to lawless animals, criminals, gangbangers, drug violence. We should just sacrifice our nation's capital. Yeah, okay. No blaming the radical Islamic extremist or Joe Biden, who literally imported the guy. That would make too much sense. We have another one from JoJo, very big Democrat account over on Twitter. She says those poor National Guard troops should have been home with their families, not deployed on our city streets. Deploying more of them is not the answer. Again, seemingly continuing the theme of blaming President Trump for deploying our National Guard, which we're very appreciative of them. And in fact, I would agree at a certain level, I would agree with her, they should have never had to be there. They should have been home with their families. I would have loved for them to be home with their families. But the insane failed Democrat policies in Washington, D.C. have turned it into an unlivable hellscape over the last couple of years. And we had to bring them out. We had to bring out the National Guard and make Washington, D.C. safe. I'm somebody who travels to Washington, D.C. constantly. Very, very frequently, I go to Washington, D.C., and I have seen firsthand with my own two eyeballs, I have seen the difference that it has made to bring out the National Guard. I've seen the National Guard patrolling Washington, D.C. I've waved to them, I've honked at them and tried to show them signs of support so that they know that there's people who appreciate having them out there because it is a big sacrifice. They're members of the military. They're in the United States Army. And so they're doing their job. Unfortunately, they have to do their job because you people on the left have so thoroughly failed to do yours. It's not like this is some fault of President Trump. How dare he bring out the National Guard and have them do their job? This should be a situation of how dare President Biden import 10 to 20 to 30 to 40 million violent criminal illegal aliens from places like freaking Afghanistan. There shouldn't be any Afghan nationals in this country. Why do we have Afghani nationals living in the United States? This guy overstayed his visa. He was here illegally. But whatever, I guess it's President Trump's fault. One more. We got one from John Pavlovitz. I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name. He says Trump and Pete Hegseth are culpable. They're culpable. I mean, these guys, again, they're not even trying to hide it. They're not trying to pretend like this isn't what they're doing or this isn't what they're saying. They're just straight up, just telling you exactly what they think. Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth are, quote, culpable for endangering the National Guard by putting them in harm's way. Why might we think about potentially needing to invoke the Insurrection Act? Because we have half of the country that is blaming President Trump and the National Guard rather than blaming the people who facilitated an invasion. We have Democrat mayors, Democrat governors who are doing everything in their power to endanger the lives of federal law enforcement that are trying to repel an invasion. Again, going back to the black and white of what the Insurrection Act actually says, why it actually exists. 20 million illegal aliens, sanctuary cities, Antifa. I mean, let's not forget Antifa has burned cities to the ground. Antifa has set up autonomous zones. They have spoken about and plotted for murder, all sorts of horrific political violence. Are we supposed to just ignore that? If not now, okay, so let me ask this. If now is not the time to invoke the Insurrection Act, question of the day, answer in the comments if you've gotten this far over on YouTube or wherever. Shoot me a message if you're listening on the podcast. If not now, then when? If not now, then when? Because the radical left, listen, this is something that's happening before we move on from this topic. This is something that we are seeing happen. And I think far too few people are conscious of what actually is going on. The left is much like a toddler. A toddler will naturally test the boundaries of his or her parents. They'll see, what can I get away with? What can I do? What can I do in this case rather than under the watch of my parent? What can I do without conservatives, without Republicans, without the American people correcting me? Can I bring in 20 million illegal aliens? Can I just allow Afghani nationals into this country? Can we import 20 million criminals into our country so that we have a new voting bloc? Is that what's going to be allowed? Can we celebrate in the streets the assassination and murder of Charlie Kirk? Can we dance about it? Can we celebrate it? Can we circle around ICE vehicles and throw bricks at the windows? Can we openly post on social media bragging essentially about how we want to murder federal law enforcement? Because that's what the left is doing. Can we elect Democrats to sit in positions of authority, governors, mayors, that are going to allow federal law enforcement to be encircled, boxed in a trap by people with guns and just allow it to happen? Are we going to prohibit, are we going to create sanctuary city laws and prohibit any kind of cooperation with federal law enforcement? The left is continually escalating things, and they need to be put down hard. That's the fact of the matter. And some people don't like this. Some people aren't familiar with human nature, human psychology. Some people aren't familiar with sociology, the study of power. But the fact of the matter is, go all throughout human history, when you have things like this that are happening, there's only so many outcomes that you could expect. One is a hot civil war. Because if the right starts to act like the left, tomorrow we have war tomorrow. Make no mistake about it. If the right starts to act exactly like the left, we will have a war. Right now, we are fighting a one-sided war, meaning one side isn't fighting and the other side is. One side is murdering people. One side is allowing an invasion. One side is trying to put their political opponents into prison. One side is doing all of these horrible, unspeakable things, and the other side is posting memes about it. We have, listen, I'm trying to be supportive of the president, but for God's sake, we don't need another freaking meme. We don't need another post on Truth Social about how we're going to do this or we're going to do that. We don't need something that's just going to piss a bunch of people off but have no action behind it. I would rather you speak quietly and then rip somebody's freaking head off than constantly talk about, oh, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to post a meme, we're going to Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, somebody's going to do an investigation, I'm going to write a strongly worded letter. I don't freaking care about your letter. We're about to lose our country. It's time, metaphorically, it's time to cut somebody's freaking head off rather than just constantly yapping, constantly talking. Well, I might do such and such. You'll do nothing. That's what you've shown them thus far. And there's still time. It's time. If there's anybody of any freaking value at the FBI, if there is anyone out there in our federal government that has any freaking sense to them, put this down now. Because if the government is not willing to do it, I'm telling you as a student of history, the people will. And that is a godforsaken outcome. That is the worst possible thing that could happen to this country, is if rather than the government quelling a violent insurrection, if the people end up doing it, God forbid, and this is not me telling the people to do it, do not do it. That is a terrible, terrible, terrible outcome for literally everyone. I'm a realist. There will come a time, if the government is not willing to do something about it, the people will. You cannot have a bad economy. You cannot have no American dream. You cannot have no future for military-aged men who are pissed off, who have been bullied and spit upon for their entire existence. You cannot have all of these factors and never-ending civil unrest with a federal government that is not willing to put it down. There will come a time where the people will do it themselves, and they will probably do it wrong. And it will probably be the kind of thing that ends up like a French Revolution, some sort of a godless murder fest where blood runs in the street, and it will be the hands of the Republicans who didn't do anything to stop it that will be responsible for it. You are wielding power. Romans says that God gave government the authority to wield the sword. Wield it. Swing it. Do what you need to do to protect this country. It doesn't have to be the Insurrection Act, but by God, it has to be something. It has to be something. I'm not going to watch another person get shot in the neck. I'm not going to watch another city burn. Another set of National Guardsmen get shot in the head. When is enough enough? It's like a bunch of toddlers that are testing their parent to see how much they can get away with before their butt hurts from a spanking. Except, unfortunately, in this case, the stakes are a lot higher. They are way higher, because it ends up a war of 350 million Americans fighting each other. We've already been in that place in this country, and by God, it was a miracle we made it through it. I don't know that we make it through a second time. Something has to be done. And when I look at the Insurrection Act, I say that's an option on the table. Is it the best option? I don't know. It is an option on the table. What I can tell you is the time of these frickin' memes is over. What I can tell you is the time of watching foreign invaders rape and murder our people is over. Something has to be done. And it has to be done fast. Because otherwise you will have given away the game. You will have given away literally everything. There will be no country to return to. There will be nothing to fight for in the future but ashes. We cannot live like this. We cannot be dominated by the left constantly. It's what they're doing. This is a form of domination. This is a form of forced humiliation. For the left to continue to do this, knowing that they operate with impunity. That the worst that's going to happen is a Truth Social meme. How about you perp walk some of these people? How about you perp walk about 1,000 of them? How about you go and you find all of these people who have been spending the last week trying to get people to shoot federal law enforcement, and you put them in freaking prison? How about you go and you arrest those Democrats who are running these cities, running these states, that are setting up these sanctuary city laws that are endangering the lives of our law enforcement? How about you do something about it? I hope you will. I hope you will. Anyways, on a slightly less intense, potentially just as serious, but slightly less intense topic, support for gay marriage has dropped to only 54%. I see this as nothing but a net positive. There's been discussions on social media lately, over on Twitter, over on X. The significance of these conversations seems to pale in comparison to our previous conversation. But public perception is changing. The LGBTQ stuff, the trans agenda stuff, it has done a tremendous disservice to those people in that community. They've gone too far. It was never about, and by the way, this is what it was always going to end up. The slippery slope is real. It was never just about what you do in the privacy of your home. This is something we've talked about in fairly great detail in the past. What you allow to happen, what you allow to be normalized, you're going to get more of. And when you concede the ground and you say, well, it's okay, we're going to back off the religious topic, and we're going to say it's totally fine for two men to get married, that gay marriage is just as real and just as valid as actual marriage, which it's not. There's no such thing as gay marriage. But when the government institutes something under the name of gay marriage, and everybody just has to pretend that it's totally normal. Why would it stop there? Why wouldn't you have gay couples on Disney Channel? Why wouldn't you have gay teachers talking about the fact that they're married to a man in the classroom? Why wouldn't, there's all sorts of issues with that. And we're seeing it. We're seeing the rejection. This is probably being led by young men, frustrated young men who are sick and tired of seeing their country destroyed, the social rot and the decay. I mean, it's like we're living in Weimar Germany or something. We have this perversion, the insanity, people mutilating young children, chopping off their genitals, brainwashing them and convincing them of things that are simply not true. And so when I see the support dropping, 54% is 54% too high. But this is a very significant decrease. If you look at some polling, we've seen numbers as high as 60, 70, 80%, depending on who you ask and when. Support for gay marriage. There has been an overwhelming shift in the last 10, 15 years. There was a huge shift towards support for gay marriage. Then we're watching it, we're seeing it happen right now, a huge shift away from gay marriage. On a similar note, it's back in the conversation again. Men are buying babies. We have a viral image. I have it on my X if you want to go see it. I don't necessarily recommend that you go see it. It's a pretty disturbing thing to see. But we have another picture has gone viral of two men in a hospital, and they're sitting there shirtless, clutching the baby that they just purchased. Many of these children are being custom ordered, by the way, through the surrogacy situation. They're basically shopping for their babies. Oh, I want one with this color of hair. I want one with this. And then they pick the surrogate and they pick all of this stuff. And it's literally like they create a baby catalog and then they buy the kids. So I'm not saying that just to be like hyperbolic. They're buying children. This is the commodification of children. This is a godless, evil, hedonistic, horrific thing. It should be very illegal. My politics are whatever makes that extremely illegal, like punishable by life in prison or more severe than that. There should not be two men intentionally, purposefully commodifying children and then stripping them of their parents. We see through surrogacy, an example, I spoke about this on the show maybe a year and a half ago when it happened. Could have been, further in the past than that. I don't know. But there was a surrogate who had gotten cancer, and the gay men who had purchased the child inside of her decided that they wanted the baby to be aborted. She said, I'll just deliver the baby early. I'll take care of it. It'll be fine, because she needed cancer treatment. And so she said she would delay her cancer treatment so that she could give birth to the child and give it a chance at life, just a little bit premature. And the gay men that had purchased that child said, no, we don't want that one. That one might be messed up. If it has to be born early, just kill it. And she said, no, don't kill it. I'll take care of the baby. But it was too much litigation. She couldn't. Legally, the contract that she had signed said that baby belonged to them. So they made the decision to kill the baby that she was growing inside of her. Really? It was never going to end at two men getting married. It was always going to be bake the cake. It was always going to be use my pronouns. It was always going to be let your child into the locker room so she can see my naked body. It was always going to be let us buy custom mail-ordered babies, and then if we find out that they have to come out premature, we'll just have them killed because we don't really want one that's messed up or something. We don't really want one that was born prematurely. We would rather the baby just be mercilessly slaughtered, thrown into the trash like it was some sort of a designer bag that you found out had a couple stitches in the wrong spot. So you don't want that one anymore because it's not exactly the luxury item that you thought it was. Many of these homosexual couples, in Hollywood at least, are buying these children as though you would buy a Cartier bag or a Rolex watch, something that you can flash to your friends and say, ooh, look at my novelty item that I purchased. Look at my luxury item that I purchased. Except in the case of many of these homosexuals, they're buying a little baby boy as their novelty luxury item. Anyways, one more thing. This is a lighthearted note. We'll end today's show on a much more lighthearted note. Secretary Duffy has suggested that we start dressing a little bit better at the airport. He said, enough pajamas, enough slippers. You people look like hobos. Okay, he didn't say the last part, but you look like hobos. Listen, I travel all the time. Lately, I haven't had to travel that much, which has been nice. But for work, I travel quite often. I am the president of a pro-life nonprofit, so I end up doing quite a bit of travel for that. And D.C. is one of the most common places, as I mentioned earlier, but pretty much everywhere that you go, every airport I've been into a lot of them, every airport, you see what looks to be an epidemic of homeless people. And I'm thinking, how did you get into the airport? These tickets are quite expensive. They're like $500 to go anywhere anymore. I'm thinking, where did you guys get the tickets to come in here? And then I go, oh no, you're just traveling in your Cookie Monster pajamas with your bonnet on and your slippers and your toes hanging out, and you got these people looking all greasy, like barbecue stains and sweat and grease and nasty. I mean, they just look gross from all walks of life. You see stuff and it's like, oh yeah, maybe this isn't the time to clip your freaking toenails. You're on an airplane. Maybe this isn't the time to be dressing like a bum. And I think there's something to be said, not to be that little old church lady, but sometimes those little old church ladies were right. All throughout history, it seems like they were right. Elvis gyrating and shaking his hips. Did anything good come from that? Anyway, we're not going to open that can of worms today. But anyway, at the airport, the way you dress is important. I've gone to the airport in sweatpants before. I have. I'm guilty. I don't always travel in a suit, though sometimes I do. But I don't always travel in a suit. Sometimes I'm comfortable. But look presentable. You don't have to be unbathed. You don't have to be clipping your toenails. You don't have to be, doing this just disgusting, like antisocial, nasty stuff with, I mean, it looks like you just dug these clothes out of a dumpster behind Goodwill. Like, where did you even get that? Have you no shame? Have you no decency? Have you no self-respect for the way that you present yourself to other people? I think there is some truth to the idea that the way you dress says a certain something. Back in the day, do you think that there was like crime? If you see a guy walking around in a three-piece suit, is he about to commit a crime? It's very unlikely. He might commit some white-collar crime. You might embezzle some funds or something. He's not going to stab you. Like, you don't see a guy in a three-piece suit unless it's like a pimp suit. I mean, I guess there could be some, exceptions here. But you don't see a guy in a suit and think, oh, come here, honey. Like, move your wife and kids away from the person and think, oh, he's going to stab you. They might rob you blind. I mean, it might have happened before. But, when you dress a little bit nicer, you behave a little bit nicer, you conduct yourself a little bit nicer. When you're nice to the people around you, they're nice to you. It's Christmas time. It's Thanksgiving time. It's a good time to be nice and respectful and not be a jerk and not be a bum and not be greasy everywhere that you go. Well, folks, that was, what do we have? 46 minutes and 47 seconds, one take. How's that for a show? I hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a great Thanksgiving. Have a wonderful, I'm sure I'll have some stuff out before Christmas, but have a great Christmas. If you don't catch another, episode of the show between now and then, take care. God bless. Keep me in your prayers. Keep your country in your prayers. I'll see y'all next time.